Let's talk about why God created compensation. So can you give us just a short summary? I'm sure there's many more reasons than you're able to cover, or perhaps even more than you know at this moment, because it's hard to know in the infinite capacity of God. But just some of the reasons why God created compensation.
Yeah, so here it's probably appropriate that we just list some of those reasons. The very first one we've already mentioned, which is self-responsibility, enforcing self-responsibility upon the human. Very, very important. Without the law of compensation, self-responsibility would not be enforced. So it's a very important part of the law, why we have compensation.
It also educates humans about what is ethical and moral, doesn't it? So if we define morality as God's definition of what's love, that's how we can begin to engage in this education process, isn't it?
Yes, in some ways, if as we'll learn later, there is a way that God can tell us truth, but let's say we're ignoring that. And there's also a way God can give us love, but let's say we're also ignoring that.
Yes.
So let's say we're ignoring God altogether. How do we determine what is right and wrong, what is in our best interest and what isn't? Well, the law of compensation is the thing that does that for us. So without the law of compensation, we wouldn't know what is ethical or morally right or wrong, particularly when we're disconnected from God and can't hear God and we can't feel God. Then basically we're left to the law to determine something. And without the law of compensation, we wouldn't be able to determine what is right and what is wrong morally or ethically.
Yeah, I always marvel at the many avenues God has to educate us. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
So another reason really is that God has a capacity to actually correct immoral and unethical behaviour, doesn't he? So even we have this free will opportunity to do what we want. But if that is unethical and unloving and immoral, then there is a correction process that's going to happen. And that seems loving to not only others, but to ourselves.
Yes, it's loving to yourself because it's a bit like, you could say, if we put it in its really raw state, imagine if we didn't understand what fire did to the human body. We would touch hot things frequently, and if we didn't have some kind of feedback mechanism that gave us some pain, that said, actually, you're now exceeding the design of this body. This body can't cope with that kind of heat for a long period of time without destroying its cell structure. And if you keep, burning your body like this, you'll end up with no body to use,
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that's what the law of compensation also does with regard to moral and ethical issues, as well as physical issues as well, but particularly with moral and ethical issues. It tells us like what is fire to us, what burns us, what's going to harm us, either in the short or long term, and therefore what we should stay away from. But also there's the converse as well, the reward part. So, you've mentioned the corrective part, but there's also the reward part, and that is basically the complete opposite of that. Let's reward the behaviour which is in harmony with love, that is in the framework of God's definition, if you like, of what love should be for the human. Let's reward that, and let's ensure that there's not only this corrective consequence, but also a rewarding consequence for loving behaviour. And so compensation, if you didn't have compensation, that wouldn't occur at all.
So essentially you're really saying that it's a way that we can learn how to be happy and learn what causes pain and suffering, not just for ourselves, but for the human race collectively.
Yes. Now, and also there's this beautiful balance in the law of compensation, isn't there? That what causes happiness for me must also not cause misery for you. The laws of compensation determine that if something causes my happiness, from God's perspective, it should not cause your unhappiness at the same time. It should either cause your happiness or at least be neutral for you. And this is a beautiful thing about the law, because without that aspect to it, we'd be so focused on our own selfish happiness without seeing how we destroy the happiness of others. And that's something, that we need to see quite clearly. Also, with regard to that, we are frequently right now doing things which destroy the happiness not for people around us right now, but for future generations.
Yes.
And destroy their happiness. And if we're not careful on the planet, we'll end up with a shortage of water and a shortage of food and so forth. And this is all the ways that we are right now taking actions and decisions that are out of harmony with love for the next generation of people. And the laws of compensation also correct that. So it's the beautiful thing about the law of compensation is that it's about balance and harmony, equality in the environment and between humans. And so without the law of compensation, you wouldn't have a measure of equality. I would be only focused on my own happiness and my own desires, and I would go, well, you have to fend for yourself, and even if my happiness causes your unhappiness, then that's fine, is what I'd probably normally do. But with the law of compensation, you start saying, well, actually, that's all not true. You know, for what is good for one person must also be good for other people. Otherwise, it's not good for even for the one.
Yes. And throughout this discussion, in this session and the next couple of sessions, we'll talk about why it often appears that people can get away with it without there being any compensatory effects.
But the reality is they can't.
They can't.
They can't at all. And in fact, the wheels of compensation, if you like, the grinding machine grinds to very, very small particles, really, of emotion and feelings and thoughts and so forth.
Yeah.
And so it's important for us at some point to recognise that everything is measured.
So really this is a correction of injustice on God's part?
Yes, it's a creation of justice. God wants everything to be equal and just. And so, you know, obviously compensation has to correct injustice, but it also has to compensate for injustice. So that's the beautiful thing about it too, is that things that have unjust that have happened here on earth are often in the spirit world corrected by rewards, compensatory rewards that occur because you put up with this injustice and so forth. So yeah, there's so many, if you examine the whole of the human existence, not just the earth life, you see all these beautiful things that happen as a result of the functioning of the compensatory laws.
Yes, yes. And another part of it is that, well, essentially what you've outlined already is that God's governance, God is governing through the operation of the laws governed by these principles. Yeah,
there's a common thought, if you like, that humans, by being given the gift of free will, now should be able to do anything they want. And that's not logical, because obviously whoever created the universe, in this case obviously God, but if you think about it, whoever would create the universe, if you create something, you want to govern how it's used or utilised. It's like people on earth create a car and then they give you an instruction manual of what it can cope with, you know, what it can do. And if you exceed the design of the vehicle through pranging it, driving it into a brick wall or whatever, then obviously it's not going to last very long. And if you don't service it or you don't refuel it and so forth, it's not going to work at all, and so forth. So you can see in regards to anything humans create, we always provide some kind of framework upon which to govern the operation of that piece of equipment, and people don't then logically apply the same rule to God. If God created the universe, then God's providing a framework where God wants the survivability of the universe. He wants the universe to be able to be stable. He wants it to be able to support life and so forth. And without the law of compensation, humans could take actions that are so extreme without any consequence that would end up, in many cases, destroying even things like the whole Earth, for example, where 7+ billion people reside at the moment. So this is why it's so important that God made the law so that you know the survivability of everything is maintained as well.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, and so is there anything else you'd like to add about compensation, just briefly about why God created it?
Well, I think it needs to be stated that compensation also supports growth of things that are loving, not just the creation of the things that are loving, but the growth of things that are loving. And it also supports the destruction of things that are unloving. So not just penalising you for the creation of the unloving thing, but compensation also is God's attempt to, and I say attempt because we've still got free will, you know, we can still maintain.
We can still use our will to keep maintaining a thing.
But God will, and God's laws will attempt to destroy everything that we create that's out of harmony with love.
You spoke a lot about that in the 2016 assistance groups, didn't you?
Yes. So it's important that people understand that it's not just about correction and reward, but it's also about how can a thing grow, and how can growth be sustained, and why are things destroyed? But like these kind of questions are all answered with the law as well. Things grow because the law of compensation allows them to grow and it promotes their growth, and things decay or are destroyed because the law of compensation needs to destroy them. God's always attempting to destroy any creation that's out of harmony with the love in God's universe. So there's quite a lot there as to why God did it. You know, that's just a short list. Obviously, we could cover a lot more things, but you know, this isn't going to be an exhaustive conversation about compensation, but hopefully it's given people a bit of an idea of why God created compensation.
And I think the real and substantial benefits of the creation. Of course, everything God creates has benefits, but compensation is one of those things that people often don't feel is beneficial.
Yes, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, but I suppose the primary one is that people feel pain and suffering for the unloving actions they take, and then they don't align them with the fact that they've broken the laws of involving compensation for some reason, and instead they try to blame it on some other factor. So it's very important that they understand that God, as we stated in our very first session, God's laws have all been created for our benefit and our happiness, and the law of compensation has been specifically created for our benefit and our happiness.
Okay, let's move on.